Oblivion's success was a huge influence on both RPGs and open world games as we know them today. Within this massive game were quite a few systems that were very interesting in theory, but very easily abused in reality. Things that could exist in the Wild West of 2006 game design, but never in today's AAA games. In my last video, I discussed how the leveling and difficulty scaling of the game was broken in many ways. Those issues often led to a negative experience for many players. On the other hand, we have Oblivion's spellcrafting system. While still being easily abused by players, spellcrafting happens to be quite fun to play around with. As one of the perks of advancing through the Mages Guild, players are eventually allowed to combine any spells they know to create entirely new magic. On top of being able to modify a wide range of values for each spell type, players can also stack up to 4 different effects onto a single spell. As you increase the relative power of each spell, the cost naturally increases. Stronger spells will have higher skill requirements, require more magicka to cast, and cost more gold to create. Sounds fine in theory. Players should only be able to make really strong spells if they have the skill, magicka, and gold prerequisites. However, that's not always the case. Given the enormous amount of potential combinations, it was inevitable that players would pick it apart to find the most overpowered spells rather quickly. The most obvious ones would be spells that deal incredible amounts of damage for a very low cost. This was usually done by stacking multiple weakness to magic effects before hitting the enemy with a damaging spell. Did I mention that spell effects stack? Yep, drop a couple weakness to magic spells on the enemy in a row and you can easily one-shot anything in the game. But those are just the boring combat breaking spells. Oblivion has numerous ways to completely break the combat system, and custom spells are just another cherry on top. Instead of just talking about another way to make the game trivially easy, let's look at some of the more fun uses for the spellcrafting system. I'll start with some more commonly used combinations and work my way down to the really interesting stuff. There are 3 methods of spellcasting: Self, which only affects you, Touch, which affects something in melee range, and Target, which fires a projectile of the spell. Did you know that touch spells are significantly faster to cast? Whether intentional or not, the animation for casting a touch spell is much shorter than the other 2 types. This means that for any spell category you want to level up quickly, you can make a touch spell, perhaps something cheap like Feather, and then put the actual skill you want to level below it. One fun combo that some people overlook is stacking Speed and Athletics, or Speed and Acrobatics in multiple spells. Like I said before, you can keep stacking spell effects to get your stats way beyond the normal max of 100. Speed and Athletics will let you run super fast, much faster and more maneuverable than the terrible horses in Oblivion. However, if you prefer travel on horseback, just change your Speed and Athletics spell to work on Touch. Boom, lightning speed horse. Although you'll probably end up killing it by flying off a small hill. Meanwhile, Speed and Acrobatics will give you super jumping abilities, which can be used to easily get outside of most areas, especially cities. In a more practical sense, you can jump past obstacles in Oblivion gates, like over the lava, around a gate, or even from tower to tower if your spells are strong enough. Another interesting mechanic would be having a max range telekinesis spell queued up. This allows you to look at distant enemies, items, etc. to see their name and what interact action you would have with them. You don't even have to use the spell to see the effects. One can assume from this that having a telekinesis spell queued up simply extends the base interaction range of the player. One of my personal favorites is something that sounds rather simple: a strong damage fatigue over time. You see, damage fatigue drains a unit's stamina, even down into negative values. Stamina is used for things like attacking, jumping, blocking, etc. The general stamina regeneration rate is 10 per second, so anything stronger than that will keep the target at negative stamina once they pass 0. But the real kicker comes with the fact that Oblivion has some very strange interactions when a unit's stamina drops below 0. Upon reaching negative stamina, a unit is basically knocked out. They lose control and fall to the ground, unable to do anything until their stamina regenerates above 0. You might be thinking, why not just make a paralyzed spell? Isn't that what they're for? Not quite. In fact, I completely stopped using paralyzed spells once I started playing with these fatigue over time spells. Let me explain. One benefit is how cheap damage fatigue is in comparison to paralyze. You can use a simple damage fatigue for 20 points or so over X seconds if you want to keep the spell cheap to cast. Every second past the point of 0 stamina is more than 1 second of knockout time on the target. As I said, units can't stand back up until they reach 0 stamina. If you drop them down to negative 100 stamina and the spell ends, they still have 10 full seconds until they can act again. As for my personal favorite reason to use damage fatigue, well, paralyze just freezes up the limbs of the target and drops them like a rock. On the other hand, negative fatigue is very buggy, in a good way. It causes the target to ragdoll as if they died, retaining some momentum and often leading to floppy bodies falling all over the place. It looks more as if they tripped, although behind the scenes the actual collision is quite strange. For example, if you fatigue yourself while in the middle of a large jump, your body will flop downwards while the camera in your collider will continue on its trajectory. The game seemingly separates the body from the actual character controller, opening up for a whole host of strange bugs. This wonkiness is compounded 1,000 times over when someone is riding a horse that gets hit with negative stamina. I've seen a huge range of bugs occurring from this odd interaction. Things like guards continuing to talk and attacking the player invisibly while their body remains crumpled on the ground. Horse ragdolls that you can ride in a sideways fashion but not move anywhere. The player's model being permanently stuck on the previous horse ragdoll and effectively being invisible in third person until you can reload a save. Even the ability to ride a horse with no character, appearing as if you're playing a third person horse simulator. It's all incredibly buggy and super fun to play around with. I highly recommend trying it out. Some other honorable mentions would be 1 to 2 second spells that break certain stat checking mechanics. Fortify Armorer on self will allow you to repair all your gear without breaking repair hammers. Feather on self will allow you to fast travel even if you're over encumbered. Speed on self will drastically cut down the travel time when fast traveling. And Charm on touch will give you max disposition when talking to an NPC. This can result in better deals, more conversation options, and even guards letting you get away with crimes. As you can see, there's quite a lot of potentially buggy fun to be had with Oblivion's spellcrafting system. If you've played Oblivion before and skipped over the Mages Guild, I definitely suggest going back and trying it out. Or if you haven't played and are interested in experiencing this wild system firsthand, give it a shot. There's a lot that can be said when it comes to game design and why these systems aren't in games anymore. The amount of freedom given to the player was just too vast, and that opened up a whole can of worms in the process.
Don't touch that!
However, we can all enjoy the fact that spellcrafting exists in the first place, and that Oblivion is still easily accessible today. That about wraps up my deep dive into this goofy side of the game. Were there any spell combinations you came up with that were particularly funny or useful in some way? Did you just instantly break the game when you first got access to spellcrafting? I'd love to hear your stories on the topic, so feel free to share them in the comments. On the other hand, if you'd like a more design-oriented explanation of the leveling and difficulty systems in Oblivion, feel free to take a peek at my other video. As for me, I think I've got quite a lot of video ideas kicking around. Not just Elder Scrolls games, but a whole bunch of things I'd be interested in doing a full analysis on. If that sort of stuff interests you, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Motivation is my driving factor here, so if people like these videos, I'd love to keep on making them. Anyways, until next time everyone, have a good one.